Royal family is gathered in Scotland for their annual summer break at Balmoral. It marks a rare occasion that they're all together, but there's one high-profile guest who was absent from this year's events.
Have you ever wondered why so many people who work for the British royal family quietly walk away from one of the most envied addresses on earth? Balmoral Castle looks like a fairy tale from the outside, all turrets and heather and royal history stretching back to Queen Victoria. But behind the gates, a very different picture has emerged over the years. One built on long hours, isolation, and wages that have shocked the public when they finally came to light. The real reasons staff have left Balmoral are far less romantic than the postcard, and far more revealing about life inside the royal household. A castle built on devoted, underpaid service. Balmoral has belonged to the royal family since 1852, when Prince Albert purchased the estate from the Farquharson family for £32,000, a sum worth nearly £4 million in today's money. According to the estate's own recorded history on Wikipedia, the current castle was completed in 1856, after Victoria and Albert decided the original house was too small for their growing family, and the staff needed to support them. Balmoral became the place Victoria called her happiest retreat from the pressures of the throne. The residence where Queen Elizabeth II spent her final months and ultimately died in September 2022, and the holiday home King Charles III continues to use today. None of that romantic history changes what working there has actually looked like for the people who keep the estate running behind the scenes. From the very beginning, royal service at Balmoral relied on a small army of staff living and working far from any major town, tucked into the Scottish Highlands, roughly 50 miles west of Aberdeen. Even in the Victorian era, household records describe maids, footmen, and gamekeepers forming an unusually tight-knit world, often serving for decades and developing close personal bonds with the family they worked for. Letters and diaries from that period paint a picture of staff who took enormous pride in their proximity to the monarch, treating a posting at Balmoral as the pinnacle of royal service rather than a burden. That sense of honor was real, and for many it outweighed the practical difficulties of the job for generations. But the world that supported that arrangement has changed dramatically, even if the castle itself has not. The same isolation once treated as a badge of loyalty and trust has, in the modern era, become one of the clearest and most repeated reasons staff eventually choose to leave. Younger employees entering hospitality and domestic service today often come from backgrounds where social media, easy travel, and constant connectivity define normal life, and a posting that cuts a person off from all of that for months at a stretch can feel less like an honor and more like a sacrifice with diminishing returns. The estate today covers more than 53,000 acres of forest, farmland, and grouse moor, a landscape that is breathtaking to visit, but considerably harder to call home for months at a stretch, far from family, friends, and the ordinary conveniences of city life. The nearest town of any real size, Ballater, offers only a handful of shops and services, and staff without a car often find themselves entirely dependent on the rhythms of the estate itself for anything beyond their daily duties. Staff accommodation on the grounds means many employees essentially live inside their own workplace, with little physical or emotional distance between their job and the rest of their existence, a structural reality of the role that has shaped staff turnover at Balmoral long before any single scandal ever made headlines. Former employees describe shared staff quarters that, while functional, rarely offer the kind of privacy or comfort that would make months of isolation easier to bear. A bad day at work cannot be left behind at the office, because the office and the home are often the same building, sometimes even the same corridor. For workers used to clocking out and returning to an entirely separate life, that blurred line between labor and rest has proven to be one of the hardest adjustments, and for many, one of the clearest reasons to eventually hand in their notice. The pay problem. The palace cannot fully explain away. Perhaps the most consistent complaint tied to royal household jobs, including positions at Balmoral, has been pay that simply does not match the prestige of the address. Reporting on royal job postings first surfaced through Insider and was later examined in greater depth by Rob Report, which found that royal job listings advertised salaries as low as the equivalent of $13 an hour for live and domestic roles. despite the institution behind those listings being worth tens of billions of pounds. The royal household pushed back hard against the original reporting, calling it inaccurate and outdated, though it never released clear, itemized figures of its own to settle the disagreement publicly. That dispute has lingered for years precisely because the palace has rarely matched its denials with transparency, leaving outside observers and prospective staff to rely on whatever salary ranges actually appear on the household's own job board. The optics of that pay gap have only gotten harder for the palace to manage as public scrutiny of royal finances has intensified. The monarchy's overall wealth, bolstered by centuries of land holdings, investment portfolios, and taxpayer-funded grants, sits in stark contrast to advertised hourly wages that critics have compared unfavorably to entry-level retail or hospitality jobs anywhere else in Britain. For staff considering a position at Balmoral specifically, the calculation becomes even more complicated once the realities of remote living are factored in. A wage that might look reasonable in a city with cheap transport and nearby family support looks considerably less attractive when the job also demands giving up easy access to either of those things for the length of a contract. That gap between image and paycheck becomes sharper once accommodation and isolation enter the picture. Many domestic roles at royal residences include on-site housing, which sounds like a meaningful benefit until new staff realize what it actually means in daily practice, living essentially on call inside their workplace with almost no separation between personal time and professional duty. Reviews from former temporary staff describe the experience in blunt, sometimes alarming terms. One review posted to Indeed warned that working for the royal household was a no-go zone for temporary employees, urging others to avoid the experience for the sake of their own physical and mental health. While that particular review did not single out Balmoral by name, it reflects a pattern documented across royal residences more broadly, where remote postings, long unsociable hours, and rigid hierarchy intensify whatever frustrations already exist over compensation. For seasonal Balmoral staff specifically, the equation is even less forgiving, since the castle only welcomes paying visitors for part of the year, meaning income and job security both narrow considerably outside the busy summer season. Workers hired for the short visitor window often find themselves scrambling for other employment once the estate quiets down for autumn and winter, turning what looks like a single job on paper into a patchwork of seasonal gigs stitched together to make ends meet across a full year. That instability rarely appears in the glossy descriptions of royal employment that circulate in the press, but it shapes the actual lived experience of dozens of workers every single year. Former employees elsewhere in the royal household have occasionally offered a more balanced picture, noting that the job comes with subsidized housing in expensive areas and a kind of prestige that can open doors later in a hospitality or service career. Some have described the experience as a valuable credential, the kind of line on a resume that signals discretion, professionalism, and an ability to operate under intense scrutiny, qualities that can translate into higher-paying private service roles down the line. But that prestige rarely shows up on a payslip, and for staff weighing months of isolation in rural Aberdeenshire against modest hourly pay, the calculation has pushed many toward the exit far sooner than palace officials would prefer. The long-term career benefit, however real it might be for a handful of standout employees, does little to soften the daily grind for someone struggling to cover rent and bills in the meantime. Financial pressure inside the household has made things worse. Money problems inside the royal household are not new, and they have repeatedly trickled down to the staff who actually do the daily work of running estates like Balmoral. During the early months of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, the household faced a shortfall reported at nearly £18 million, prompting a recruitment freeze and a pause on annual pay reviews across every royal property. Coverage at the time, including a detailed account from the World Socialist website, described an email sent by the Lord Chamberlain warning staff that difficult times lay ahead and that a pay review already in motion had been suspended entirely as part of broader cost-cutting. For seasonal workers tied to Balmoral, where revenue already depended heavily on a short tourist season vulnerable to closures, that kind of freeze landed especially hard at a moment when many households across Britain were already struggling. The pandemic exposed just how fragile the financial model behind royal residences like Balmoral really is. Visitor admissions, gift shop sales, and event hosting all dried up almost overnight in 2020, and with them went much of the income that justified keeping a full seasonal staff on the books. Many workers who had built their year around a predictable summer contract at Balmoral suddenly found themselves with no clear timeline for when, or if, that work would return. The household's response, freezing recruitment and pausing pay reviews rather than offering reassurance or enhanced support, left a lasting impression among staff who had hoped the institution's wealth and stability would offer more of a buffer during a genuine crisis. The financial pressure has not eased much since King Charles became monarch. Reports from 2023 detailed plans for a significant shakeup inside the household, with the King and Queen Camilla reportedly aiming to cut up to 20% of middle management positions across every major residence. According to coverage from Marie Claire, the cuts were expected to affect dozens of employees spread across Buckingham Palace, Sandringham, Windsor Castle, and Balmoral, out of roughly 500 permanent staff employed across the monarchy at the time. A source close to the planning told reporters the King and Queen could not abide too many people doing similar jobs, with one administration figure describing the change in blunter terms, framing it simply as getting better value from the people already on the payroll rather than outright cuts. Vice Admiral Tony Johnstone Burt, the master of the household, and Sir Michael Stevens, keeper of the Privy Purse, were placed in charge of overseeing the transition, with Camilla reportedly pushing the household toward what insiders described as a leaner, more efficient model based on practices already used at Clarence House. That restructuring effort reflected a broader shift in how the monarchy under Charles has tried to present itself to the public, leaner, more cost-conscious, and less willing to absorb criticism over bloated staffing during a period of widespread economic strain across Britain. Supporters of the changes argued that a smaller, more modern household made sense for an institution increasingly scrutinized over its reliance on public funding through the sovereign grant. Critics countered that trimming middle management did little to address the deeper issue of low wages at the bottom of the staffing ladder, the very roles most likely to be filled by seasonal and entry-level workers at properties like Balmoral. For long-serving staff at Balmoral, the prospect of redundancy after years of seasonal, lower-wage service has only deepened the sense that loyalty to the crown rarely comes with long-term security in return. Princess Anne herself publicly questioned the wisdom of a slimmed-down monarchy, pointing out that fewer staff does not necessarily translate into a more functional household, a rare moment of internal royal disagreement playing out in front of the press. Whatever the merits of that debate, the practical effect on the ground has been the same story repeating itself across multiple royal residences, staff watching budgets tighten, while public scrutiny of their wages only grows louder. Employees who had spent years building informal seniority within the household, the kind of institutional knowledge that comes from understanding exactly how a single estate operates through every season and every royal visit, found that experience offered little protection once cost-cutting. Conversations began at the top: weather, closures, and the unpredictable nature of life on the estate. Beyond money, Balmoral presents a uniquely unstable working environment, shaped almost entirely by Scottish weather. The estate sits in Aberdeenshire, an area regularly hit by severe winter storms, and the castle has closed its doors to paying visitors with increasing frequency in recent years whenever conditions turn dangerous. In late 2025, heavy snowfall forced the property to shut early on several occasions, with one notice posted to the castle's own website explaining that wintry weather conditions required closing earlier than usual that day. Coverage of one such closure from Hello noted that the decision to shut the property entirely is never taken lightly, but that it had happened more frequently throughout 2025, as severe weather warnings became more common across the region, including amber alerts from the Met Office that left staff and visitors alike watching forecasts rather than schedules. These closures matter more than they might seem from the outside, because much of the seasonal staff at Balmoral depends on steady visitor traffic for hours, tips, and the practical rhythm of a working day. When the gates close without warning, shifts get cancelled, income shrinks, and staff are left managing the same isolation and modest pay with even less certainty attached to it. Workers who had planned their week around a set rota suddenly find themselves sent home early or told not to come in at all, with little recourse and often little advance notice. For staff already stretching a modest paycheck across a long, isolated season, an unexpected closure can mean the difference between a manageable week and a genuinely difficult one. A separate closure, that same winter, covered by Royal Insider, described confusion after the castle's announcement was edited and corrected twice within a single day before a snow-related shutdown was confirmed. A small administrative mix-up that nonetheless reflects a broader truth about working at Balmoral, where unpredictability is built into nearly every part of the job, from the weather outside the walls to financial decisions made far away in London. Past closures at the estate have also been tied to flooding and high winds, meaning staff scheduling around Balmoral has rarely been as steady or reliable as a typical hospitality job elsewhere in Britain. Even the busiest months of the visitor season offer no real guarantee of consistent income once the Highlands weather decides otherwise. Beyond the immediate disruption to shifts and pay, the constant unpredictability takes a quieter toll on morale over time. Staff who might otherwise tolerate isolation and modest wages for the sake of stability find that stability itself is in short supply at Balmoral, where the next closure, the next round of cost-cutting, or the next harsh winter always seems to be waiting just around the corner. That cumulative uncertainty, layered on top of everything else, has pushed plenty of capable, dedicated workers to look elsewhere for employment that offers a more predictable rhythm, even if it comes with less royal prestige attached. None of this means every person who has ever worked at Balmoral left unhappy. Former staff across the wider royal household have spoken fondly of memories tied to the estate, including dancing at the Gillies Ball inside the Balmoral Ballroom, a tradition one former royal butler once described as among the most rewarding parts of royal service. Other former employees have recalled genuine warmth from family members during their time on the estate, alongside small but memorable perks like staff Christmas parties and invitations to events most outsiders never see. Some former staff described the friendships formed during a season at Balmoral as lifelong, the kind of bond that only forms when a small group of people live and work together through genuine isolation, sharing both the hardships and the rare, magical moments that come with working somewhere so steeped in history. But fond memories and genuine hardship have always existed side by side inside this particular corner of royal life, and the steady drumbeat of stories about low pay, financial cuts, and unpredictable conditions explains far more about staff departures than any single dramatic incident ever could. The real reason these maids and many others before them eventually walked away from Balmoral was never one shocking secret hiding behind the castle walls. It was the slow accumulation of isolation, modest wages that rarely matched the surrounding prestige, financial pressure passed down from the top of the household, and a working environment shaped as much by Scottish weather as by royal tradition. Balmoral remains one of the most recognizable addresses in the world. But for the people who have quietly come and gone from its staff roles over the decades, the appeal of working there has always had to compete with a far more ordinary set of frustrations, the same ones that push people out of difficult jobs everywhere else in the world too. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss a video. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think really happened behind the walls of Balmoral Castle, and share this with someone who loves a good royal mystery.